What's up, lore masters? Now, today's video is a Patreon request, and the original request for this video was to do a breakdown of the emergency medical hologram and its background. While doing research for this topic, it felt pretty dry, pretty straightforward. Zimmerman created the EMH, Voyager sucks, bends your aunt, marries your uncle, I gets my money. But if you know the channel, I don't really like to leave it there. Simply stating facts isn't lore, so I do try to give more if I can. Sometimes I can't, but I do make an attempt. With that in mind, I decided to look into the history of the holograms that had seemingly gained sentience and how they were treated by Starfleet. Needless to say, it really paints the Federation in a very, very dark light. Let's just get into it. Hologram technology has solidly existed within Starfleet since the mid to late 23rd century. It is first seen during the original series era on the USS Enterprise. Starfleet had been developing the technology in virtual reality since the late 22nd and into the early 23rd centuries. We also know that a species that didn't punish rapists had the technology since before that, so holographic technology had existed for quite a while. The real flirtation with advanced holograms being more than the sum of their parts occurred in the form of an episode known as The Big Goodbye from The Next Generation. In this episode, a hologram realized that perhaps his life wasn't real, that he was just in a simulation. The hologram then asks Picard if his wife and children will exist once the captain leaves the holodeck and the program deactivates. Picard seems pretty uncaring. This man's entire life was about to be destroyed and Picard simply says goodbye. He didn't really seem to care all that much. And we, like Picard, never really find out if the simulation exists for the hologram after the program shuts down. It's a question that's left unanswered. The next interaction we see is James Moriarty in the Next Generation episode Elementary, Dear Data. Moriarty had seemingly gained sentience once the computer had been ordered to make an adversary that could defeat Data. Curiously, Moriarty would challenge this and put Picard to task, asking if Data was even sentient, if he was even an android. Ironically, Picard states that Data is more than just an android, more than a sum of his parts, though we would see him have a different tune initially in the episode Measure of a Man, which had not happened yet. And just to address it, talking about Measure of a Man, Picard spent the first part of that episode not convinced that Data was actually a person. In fact, the white male Picard would have to be educated by the black woman Guinan on slavery and told how wrong he was. He wouldn't realize that he was supporting slavery until he had been educated. God, Trek can always see our future so well. Jokes aside, I'll say this. It's interesting to me how Picard is written. Sometimes he's bigoted, sometimes he's not. When challenged by an entity he did not believe to be a real person, namely a hologram, Picard considered Data above that organism, above Moriarty. So of course, in that instance, Data was real. And then, when another human, another sentient challenges whether Data is real or not, Picard has second thoughts. Now there are several theories behind this. Perhaps the fact that another human says it means something, someone who is above Data in Picard's mind, though I really don't want to take away from the interaction between Guinan and Picard. It was very powerful and very well done. It does portray Picard negatively true, but I'm not sure I could have written something better. I'm just pointing out a character flaw versus saying that that scene was done negatively. The next time we see Moriarty, he is brought back by accident in the TNG episode Ship in a Bottle. And honestly, this episode, it's a bit hard for me to gauge how Picard feels. I can't tell if he's just placating Moriarty or sincerely cares about him. Given the attitudes we see in Voyager, I would say that while Moriarty's intelligence and freedom might have been interesting to Starfleet, not many really put any stock into his needs, nor considered him to be actually sentient. Which is interesting, as the episode Ship in a Bottle occurs after Measure of a Man. We wouldn't see holograms truly be treated as anything other than tools till far into Voyager's run, and even that's arguable considering what Starfleet does. We'll get into that later though. And since I'm touching on it, let me pause and say this. While I give Picard and the crew of Voyager a lot of criticism in their interactions with advanced holograms, I kind of understand where they're coming from and why they believe what they believe. As an example, I enjoy playing StarCraft and Pathfinder Kingmaker. I've little to no concern for the lives of any Terran Marines I send to their deaths. I do think a bit more in decision making with my companions in Pathfinder because they do somewhat feel more like people, but mostly it's because they're harder to replace. If those NPCs attempted to talk to me like on a personal level, my first response would not be, oh wait, is this another form of intelligent life that has now come to me for help? It would be, wow, what a weird thing to program into a game. Let's go ahead and turn that off and look on Google to see if anyone else has seen this. I'll just go ahead and end all their lives right now. Again, I'll deep dive more into this in a later episode, but I kind of wanted to give that caveat that while I'm giving them a hard time, I do understand where they're coming from. Back to the history of the holograms, around mid to late 2360s, Starfleet finally realized that you could utilize holograms for more than just having them as playthings. They commissioned Dr. Louis Zimmerman to create a hologram that could replace the primary doctor for a short amount of time. This was the creation of the Emergency Medical Hologram Mark I. The program was extremely advanced with over 5 million possible treatments from 2,000 medical references and the experiences of at least 47 medical officers. The program was created with the ability to interact, adapt, and expand its programming as needed. The creation of this program would ultimately form the same problem that we see in Star Wars when you think about it. The program was originally just that, a program. The more time that it spent in operation, however, the more experiences that it gained, the more it became self-aware and even ultimately would meet the standards of sentience as defined in Measure of a Man. However, Starfleet would not recognize or perhaps realize the long-term impacts on the program, given its original short-term objective. Most Starfleet officers wouldn't even like the program. Some were even bigoted, such as Dr. Beverly Crusher, stating that she would never use the hologram. Ultimately, the Mark I would be retired and reassigned to dilithium mining, and we'll talk more on that in the next video. When the Mark I was retired, it was replaced with the Mark II, which was considered a definitive improvement both in personality and medical technique. However, some complaints did occur with the program's apparent alcoholism and inappropriate touching, but for me, I'm not sure if this was done by accident or on purpose. It is Star Trek, so perhaps the writers were trying to normalize inappropriate actions given how many times we see it in every other series. The Mark II would ultimately be replaced with the Mark III and Mark IV, though to my knowledge we never see in Alpha canon what these programs look like. Some people have suggested that this person is the Mark IV, and I'm sure she was chosen for her personality given our fandom. Around a similar time, we are also introduced to a program with the character named Vic Fontaine. This character is also seemingly self-aware, but fine with simply being considered a program. We have evidence that Vic Fontaine has the same level of awareness and control to that of the EMH Mark I, however, we can't really know if Vic Fontaine is self-aware. In fact, there is evidence against this, given that he doesn't want to expand, he doesn't want to go outside of his programming. He just wants to exist, and sometimes even not exist. Interestingly, the crew of Voyager would create the Emergency Command Hologram, an extension of the medical program. This program, in theory, would allow a hologram to command for a short amount of time and encompassed all of the strategic and tactical data of Starfleet. And I bet you know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to dedicate an entire video to the ECH. I touched on it beforehand, but holograms for most of Star Trek tenure have been treated as second-hand citizens. And now that we got a lot of the background out of the way, the next video is going to be focused on how Starfleet and even other species treated holograms themselves. I am curious though, given what we have with the background here, do you think that holograms are actually sentient? Or is this a discussion of sentience versus sapience? I do think that the point of the holograms were for them to become advanced, for them to become considered the same as a human being. So for me, they have gained what we saw in Measure of a Man, at least some of them have. But those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. And as always guys, never forget, ultimately our lives are just a story. Make yours a good one.